Good morning. Welcome to Net Zero Week and our keynote speech on decarbonising industry and commerce and what are the no-regret first things to get serious about doing to achieve net zero. What can you do and how? Because a lot of people are doing, putting in place climate emergencies and goals and targets, and obviously 2050 to some extent looks a long way away, but it's a short time with some of the plans that have to be put in place and some of the things that businesses will need to do to react. And what can they do now and where do they start their journey? And so we've got a range of experts today that will, with yourselves, do participate. You can ask questions via the question pane at any time. Just put them in the chat and I'll put those to the panelists as we go through this morning's discussion. And so without further ado, just to sketch an area of where we are and where we're looking to go, I'll introduce first up is Matthew Farrow, who's Director of the Environmental Industries Commission, the Association of Engineering and Consultancy. I'll hand over to you now, Matthew, and we can kick off.
Great, thank you very much, Tim, and good morning, everyone. Really delighted to be taking part in this webinar to get Net Zero Week sort of underway, as it were. I think I've got a couple of slides, Tim, haven't I, which you're going to share, if you want to.
Yes, sorry. That should be up now.
I can't see them, I'm afraid.
No, they are showing on mine. But it's no good if it's only me seeing them.
Oh, there, that looks better. So I can see the first one there has come up partially.
There seems to be a delay, actually, because that's how it didn't look like initially.
I think you need to full screen the presentation.
It's actually full screen, though. I don't understand why you're seeing what's behind.
Shall I just talk through them, Tim? The slides were pretty simple, to be honest.
Yes,
so
okay. Oh, there we are. Okay.
Oh, yeah, that's there we go. Okay, yeah, so good morning, everyone. I'm director, as Tim said, of two organisations for my sins, the Environmental Industries Commission and the ACE, the Association for Engineering Consultancy. Both organisations are supporters of Net Zero Week, so really delighted to be involved. I want to move to the next slide, Tim. So just briefly, people aren't aware of the organisation, so the EIC is a broad church organisation for companies in the environmental sector who are doing something valuable, something important in terms of environmental technology, environmental services, that is helping the mainstream economy get to grips not just with net zero, but also with the wide range of environmental topics that we all face, biodiversity, air quality, whatever it may be. And then ACE, a linked organisation, and there's a bit of cross-membership as well, represents a particular sector, the engineering consultancy sector, which is obviously crucial to the design development of the built environment that we have and getting that ready for net zero. And I've worked on with companies in these trade associations and also companies at CBI and some other associations, probably for the last 10, 15 years on sort of climate change and environmental issues. So if we go to the next slide, Tim. Again, must be a bit of a delay. I don't see it coming up yet.
Yes, I think there's a lag, unfortunately. But yes, it has gone on to it.
Yeah, there we go. So one of the points I wanted to make is, obviously at the moment, net zero is very much a sort of topic of the moment. And I think it's quite striking that whenever you see Boris speaking about pretty much anything other than COVID, he tends to be talking about net zero, build back better, green jobs, green industrial revolution. And it's very much sort of part of the media debate and the sort of public and political debate. I thought, just as we kick off this morning, worth reflecting on the fact that there have been, to my mind, two previous occasions when there was probably almost a sort of comparable focus or interest in climate change. Wasn't called net zero then, but climate change. But I think this moment is different, and I just wanted to say a word or two about that. So the first of those moments was way back in the late 1980s when Margaret Thatcher was right at the end of her premiership, possibly looking towards her legacy. And she was actually the first major political leader or country leader to make an issue of climate change. And she gave a speech to the UN in 1989. There's a couple of quotes on the slide from it, when she basically said this is going to be one of the greatest challenges of our time. We have to work together as an international community and business and public sector to tackle it, and it's going to really shape our societies and economies in the future. And you think, so that's what, 30 years ago, very prescient points to make. And at the time in the UK, the Green Party was having its first real success. It was probably polling, I think, at something like 15-20%. I think the European elections that year, where it came first, did extremely well. And for a couple of years, it seemed as if green issues were finally going to become mainstream in UK politics and with UK business. But quite quickly, obviously Margaret Thatcher herself was out of office. We had the recession of the early 90s, and issues faded away quite quickly. The second moment was probably the sort of mid-late 2000s, so sort of 2007-8, I would say. Ed Miliband at that time was in Gordon Brown's cabinet. He was the climate change secretary. And again, there was a moment at the end of the Blair government, start of the Brown government, where climate change was back on the agenda in a big way. And I remember working at CBI at the time, working with a lot of sort of FTSE 100 CEOs, all of whom wanted to be on the right side of the argument and wanted to be saying right things about climate change, wanted their companies to be making commitments. So again, a similar feel, I guess, to today. We had the Climate Change Act, the first legally binding set of targets that the UK had ever had, setting this target for 2050. And again, it seemed like a lot of talk about roadmaps, how business would be transformed. And it did feel like, again, we're on the cusp of a real sort of revolution around green issues and climate change. But again, surprisingly quickly, obviously driven really, I suppose, by the 2008 financial crash, although the Climate Change Act was passed, and passed with almost no opposition in Parliament, all the ambitious policies which Miliband and the Brown government was developing started to be sort of put on the back burner. So there were, there's an emissions trading scheme for the services sector called the Carbon Reduction Commitment. Very significant scheme. It was quite quickly toned down, turned into a carbon tax in the end. You had business associations pushing back, saying we're in one of the deepest recessions for decades. We can't cope with new regulation. And again, I think by 2010, although David Cameron had a lot of green rhetoric, the focus had really sort of moved on. And then obviously you've got the current moment where, as I say, whenever Boris isn't talking about the pandemic, he's talking about net zero. Started at the end of Theresa May's government, and one of her last things she did, she accepted the advice of the Climate Change Committee and put in law this target to say we wouldn't just cut emissions by 2050. As a country, we'd actually reach net zero emissions. And I think actually there is something different about this moment. I think because the current drive, excitement around net zero has come at a time of economic difficulty as we've gone through the pandemic. I think that means that it's not vulnerable in the way the two previous moments were to an economic downturn and everyone losing interest. Secondly, I think it's been caught up in this mood about we are going to bounce back better after the pandemic. And what everyone thinks about Boris's taste for those sort of slogans, build back better, Project Speed and so forth, I think the government, for a range of political reasons, has sort of intertwined the net zero agenda into this build back better agenda. And I think because of that, plus COP26, only 4 or 5 months away, plus the fact we do have these legally binding targets, to me it does feel like a different sort of attitude, atmosphere, both within government and in the business community. And so that's why I think it's really important that all businesses, whatever their size, whatever their sector, are thinking about this agenda and thinking about how they should respond to it. If we go to the next slide, Tim. So I'll keep this very simple because interested to hear the other panelists and hear the discussion and questions. But every business is different. You know, some businesses will be at different starting points, will have different exposure to climate risks or different sorts of emissions profile. But I think probably the sort of 5 steps I would say are relevant to any business that's just starting to think about net zero and what it might mean for it. And I think the first step is understand your emissions as a business. And I don't necessarily mean by that, you know, enormous amount of analysis and pinning down to the last gram of carbon exactly what your emissions have been over the last sort of, you know, 10 years or whatever. But just getting a grasp on what are the main sources of emissions from your business. Are they what are called direct emissions, so emissions directly produced on your site through your buildings, through your machinery? Or are they indirect emissions, so emissions from the electricity grid, where the emissions are produced by the electricity companies, but you're purchasing that that electricity? Or are they downstream emissions, so the way your products are used, you know, creates emissions themselves? And just to understand, you know, is it most of your emissions are from your buildings perhaps, or most emissions from business travel or fleets of vehicles that you may own or lease? Secondly, though, I think it's really important to think about the context for your sector. And I'll come in a minute to talk about sort of sector net zero plans, which I think are one of the big developments the last sort of couple of years. But different sectors are going to change in different ways to respond to the net zero challenge. And I think it's important to think about what that will mean for your company, your competition, the sort of technologies and business models that are particularly prevalent in your sector, so that rather than just thinking about your own company, you're thinking about, you know, how the market you're operating in is going to change. And obviously then particularly important you link that to what are the drivers for your customers. Are they being pushed to adopt net zero because they want to, you know, these are big public sector clients perhaps who are your customers, and they're being pushed to change by government policy, government practice? Are they big private corporates who want to be seen to be leading the battle against or for net zero, and they're making very ambitious pledges? Are you part of a global supply chain where there are global standards that are going through that supply chain that might change what your customers need from you? Or is it that your customers want to be net zero, don't really understand what that means, but expect you as a supplier to be helping them on that journey? So again, I think that's particularly important. What are the drivers for your customers? Then I think for your own emissions, I think to be taken seriously and to have those conversations with your customers, you need to be setting a target and looking to tackle your own emissions. And I guess there's, you know, lots of advice information out there. There are consultancies obviously who will provide advice for a fee. But I guess the two points I would make is, where there are things you can do very simply that are sort of no regrets policies to cut emissions, you know, why not get on and do those? So for example, if you're a construction firm, you run construction machinery, I'm sure Magnus will talk about what his company does, Green Biofuels, but the sort of low emission fuels that companies like his can offer that can be dropped into existing plant and machinery, can cut emissions without having to, you know, buy lots of new equipment and so forth. So other very simple things that you can do that immediately get you on that journey. But then secondly, I think prioritization is the key. Particularly if you're an SME, it's not possible, or certainly not very easy at all, to try and tackle every type of emission you have, you know, to overanalyze everything. But think, what are the big things? What are the big source of emissions? Is it vehicles? Is it buildings? Is it manufacturing processes? Is there something you can do over time to significantly cut those emissions? And then I guess lastly, there's a lot of public pledge schemes around now that companies are increasingly signing up for, to make a public statement to say, look, we're part of this pledge scheme. It might be Race to Zero, the UN one. We at EIC have actually created one for professional services bodies. It's called Pledge to Net Zero. If you Google that, there's a website. There's a lot of guidance on that helps professional services firms decide how to set a target to make that public pledge. So that's, again, a decision worth thinking about. We go to the next slide, Tim. Yeah, I think one of the big things that's happened in the last probably year and a half is we've had the rhetoric from the government, but in many parts of the economy we're still waiting for real new policies to come in, new regulations to come in from the government that will drive us towards net zero. I think we'll see a lot of that come through in the autumn. The government has pledged that they will publish a sort of overarching net zero plan before COP26, and that will provide some sort of context and shape for individual sectors. But I think what's been really encouraging in the last year or two has been you've seen individual sectors, often driven by individual trade associations, actually getting the ball moving, as it were, and creating a route map for their sector to show how they think their sector is going to fit into a net zero future. And I think those sector plans are a really good resource. If you're selling into a sector that has a net zero plan, definitely worth having a look at that, thinking about how that's going to influence how your customers are going to be investing or changing the way they think. But equally, if you are part of a sector that has a net zero plan, perhaps you're a member of a trade association that's on the front foot on this issue, again, definitely worth engaging. This is just one example here. So it's one done by Water UK, the water sector trade body, called Net Zero 2030. And it sets out in relatively straightforward terms, with lots of technical details there if you want it, but in a fairly straightforward way, how the water sector is looking to change over the next 3 decades. And I've just given a couple of sort of key points there, and how that is going to change the sort of equipment they want to buy, the sort of investments they're going to make, the way they want to work with their customers. So then just finally, I think there's one more slide, Tim. Yeah, just a sort of thought in closing. Terminology is a real minefield, I think, in this field. There's been so much change, so much enthusiasm, so much new policy coming through that a whole sort of language has grown up around net zero in the last sort of 5 years or so. And inevitably, people are using different terms in different ways, in different contexts. And often I find talking to my members at EIC, ACE, they say when they're talking to their clients, there's often confusion around what the company thinks it's trying to do, what regulations it's responding to. And a bit of a plug here, we're launching, as part of Net Zero Week, we're launching next week a guide for SMEs that we've published, or we are publishing next week, a guide to net zero, which has advice on how policy is changing, how to talk to clients about net zero. But it also has a bit of a guide to terminology, and this is just an extract from that, trying to give people a sense of what are the main terms being used, what is the most widely accepted definition for them, and then signposting to where if you want to find out definitions in regulation or definitions used by public bodies, you can do that. But I think the terminology is a bit of a minefield. So for your own business or talking to your customers, it is worth just sort of understanding what are the phrases that people are bandying around, and how they relate to what you might want to do, what you're selling, or what your customer is looking for. So I'll leave it there, Tim, but really pleased to be part of Net Zero Week. I think it's a really exciting time. A lot of innovation is going to come out of the next 10, 20 years, and I think that will lead to a lot of business opportunities. So lots to look forward to.
Oh, absolutely, Matthew, and I look forward to exploring it further in the debate in a few minutes. So now we hand over to Magnus Hammock from Green Biofuels, who will dive a little deeper into some actual specific solutions that you can start with on your journey to net zero. Magnus, are you there?
I'm here, Tim.
I'm giving you control, so you should be seeing your screen if you're...
Okay, can everyone see my screen? Do we have the panelists at the top of it, or is that mine?
Sorry.
Hello? Okay, brilliant.
You're right, yes. No, you're fine. I can see your screen. Yes, brilliant. Kick off. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And, Matthew, thank you very much for the context to Net Zero Week that you've just put, and Green Biofuels are delighted to be part of Net Zero Week and work through some of the events, but importantly, just explaining the road to net zero and some transition pathways that we're helping customers already on that journey. So Green Biofuels is the largest importer of hydro-treated vegetable oil, which is a paraffinic diesel. The product is actually named as Green D+, and that is a very pure form, 100% drop-in diesel replacement with no modification to existing plant or equipment. We bring that product in from Europe and then we advertise it. And we focus on two main areas. Net zero, because the fuel is waste-derived, it's a waste-derived biomass style fuel, it has a significant reduction in greenhouse gases, 92% reduction based on default values. But also it's an exceedingly clean burn technology, so we're helping local air quality as well at the same time. And currently we operate and supply fuel into a number of different verticals, into the rail industry, power, maritime, commercial fleets, agriculture and construction. All of our achievements on the road to net zero are really the achievements of our customers, our partners on the journey with us. So currently there's many solutions, many pathways to net zero being bandied at us. And really what we see is we see that there is a climate emergency now. There is an immediacy of action that needs to be taken rather than waiting to see which pathway comes forward as a solution. And as such, Green D is basically a tool in the toolbox of industry to actually help on the road to net zero. Interestingly, and we love technology as a business, and we don't see the fact that other technologies are coming forward as being a negative. We see that's hugely positive. The UK will reach peak diesel in 2027, so a few years off yet. And then by 2050, we need to get to net zero. Along that journey, we will see a number of different solutions replacing the spark ignition engine. Those will include natural gas, CNG, LNG, biogas, electricity, and hydrogen. All of those technologies are here today, but in different stages of evolution and transformation. All of them share one characteristic, which is they require some infrastructure to be put in place. And that infrastructure is part of Boris's green revolution and welcomed and will evolve over time. So will help us get from peak diesel to a reduced volume by 2050. So on the pathway to net zero, obviously, HVO, these are numbers, by the way, taken from BASE, and so we have a carbon intensity, CO2e per litre per kilogram. This is a kilogram of CO2 per litre for B7 biodiesel, pump diesel as we affectionately call it. That has a default value of 3.122 kilograms of CO2e per litre. Simply by displacing the pump diesel with Green D HVO, you're going to save 2.83 kilograms of CO2e per litre. Now that's significant. So for every one vehicle or one diesel piece of plant running on fossil diesel, you can run 12 equivalent vehicles on sustainable renewable fuel. Important to think, what is this fuel? It's HVO, as I described. It's created from sustainable renewable waste, organic matter, the same products that actually go into traditional biodiesel. But that's where the similarity ends. Because it's a very pure paraffin, It has no olefins or aromatics. It's odorless. It's biodegradable. It has no summer or winter grade. Its cold pour point is minus 34 degrees. And as a result, it breaks down more efficiently in the engine and therefore reducing particulates at the tailpipe. So from a planetary point of view, the reduction in carbon, but from a local air quality point of view, significant reduction in particulate matter and NOx. And that's really important, because not only do we see a need to decarbonise, but we also see a need to improve local air quality and our immediate environment. All of this has to be verified and substantiated, because we can't transition from fossil diesel to an alternative, a drop-in replacement, without making sure that the credentials of that are robust and there's a reporting structure to suit. It's levelled in media that obviously there's not enough feedstocks to displace 34 billion litres of diesel, which is currently what the UK consumes. However, every little bit helps. So over the next 5 years, we'll see at least 1 billion litres of fossil diesel replaced with renewable, sustainable products. We need to make sure that the measure of sustainability is not at the cost of other environments. And principally, we see that as being certification schemes that allow us to look at cradle-to-grave applications. No virgin crops are used within the production of our fuel. No land use is displaced. No virgin palm oils. And this comes through the ISCC certification schemes, along with other newly introduced schemes from the Zeno Partnership, which is the Renewable Fuel Assurance Group, which truly now gives industry and the industries that are members of the EIC and other sectors true transparency of what they have been supplied, what their carbon reduction is, what are the origins of the feedstock that go in, and therefore we're now able to certificate the displacement of diesel with a non-fossil alternative. So, immediacy. We've all heard that since 1989, the climate emergency has been called. Every day that we lose is a day that we won't get back on this journey to net zero. We're not suggesting that alternative and advanced sustainable fuels are the panacea or the answer to all issues. And as I said before, we welcome the transition to electric and other power forms. But in that journey, our customers have decisions to make. And those choices will be defining moments in their evolution as businesses. Principally because they don't want to make the wrong choice, the wrong pathway choices. And therefore, a sustainable drop-in fuel offers them a here and now solution with no upfront capex, positive impact today. The other aspect, a saying which has come into being in our organisation and our customers, which is fuel doesn't need to cost the earth. And what does that actually mean? We look at it in two ways. HVO Green D, with all the inherent properties that we've mentioned and the greenhouse gas savings and the road to net zero, is a more expensive fuel. However, what we've realised is that our customers understand the cost base of that fuel and know that actually they can generate more benefits from taking this pathway than the cost would suggest. Pence per litre comparisons are unhelpful, but total life cycle analysis of costs and transition are becoming more and more known. So, just to round up, we are the largest importer of HVO. We create an enhanced product called Green D+. We store product across the UK, and we're able to distribute nationally. We come up with solutions because obviously rather than we're a solutions-based business in that because there's not a network already existing for advanced fuels. We've created a network on our customer sites with smart tanks, digitising not only the collection and traceability of the fuel, but also now the dispatch and delivery of the fuel. Every litre of fuel is also delivered on our fuel. So, the question is, why don't we adopt them? A lot of our customers are, so actually, why have we is a better expression of what seems to be happening in the marketplace. And year to date, 35,000 metric tons of CO2 have been saved by our customers. That's equivalent to 51,000 flights to New York. A significant dent and a fantastic move on this direction of travel to net zero. So thank you very much for your time. And as I said, we are delighted to be part of this Net Zero Week and our customers, on behalf of all our customers. Many thanks.
Great. No, thank you, Magnus. Right. Now we head over to Joe Fitzsimmons, who's Senior Policy Advisor for the Institute of Directors. Joe, are you there?
Yes, thank you very much.
Yes, brilliant. Yes, if you'd just like to introduce sort of the IID's viewpoint on net zero and how businesses should take it.
Absolutely, thank you. Hi everyone, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm really excellent hearing from Matthew and Mangus already. My name is Joe Fitzsimmons, and as you've heard, I'm the Senior Policy Advisor at the IOD based in our London office. And sustainability is one of the policy areas that I lead on here at the IOD. Just in case you're not familiar with the IOD, the Institute of Directors is Britain's oldest representative body for directors. We represent around 20,000 directors of predominantly small to medium-sized businesses. So there are two sort of key items that I'm keen to share a little bit more detail on here today. The first is some of the data that we've recently gathered from our members relating to carbon reduction and achieving sustainability goals. And the second thing that I'd like to share a bit more detail about is really what we're doing at the IOD to support our members and business leaders as a whole on their own journey. So I'll move on to that towards the end. But in terms of the research we've been conducting, we've been discussing sustainability for many years with our members, but of course we have been focusing a lot more on this over the past year or so. And so we conducted a poll of about 700 IOD members in March of this year. And there were some really interesting findings in there. So about 4 out of 5 directors indicated that it is important for their organisation to operate in an environmentally friendly and sustainable way. Now we expected that to be a high figure, but the challenge is that only 1 in 4 of our members felt that they fully understood the way in which their organisation can lower its carbon footprint and meet net zero carbon goals. And in addition to that, about 1/3 of our members feel that the costs associated with moving towards net zero goals in their organisations are prohibitive. So indeed, there's a huge sort of education piece here and hill to climb. So this to us really underlines how important priority sustainability is for our members. And as many businesses join the efforts to decrease their carbon footprint, it's vital that they have that access to the necessary resources and tools, and really excellent learning more about that here as well today. Uncertainty amongst business in overcoming the costs and the methods required to reduce their carbon footprint provides the necessity for government-led action, we believe. And this needs to be an attainable long-term strategy, including green investment incentives, improved access to relevant expertise, funded reskilling in environmental best practices, would also be welcomed by our members committing to navigating sustainability goals. So we recognize that the business community is increasingly responsible for environmental issues and indeed engaged in this agenda. And, it is really an important driving force in the efforts to achieving sustainable goals nationwide. So as I mentioned, the second item that I was keen to share a little bit of information about is our own sustainability journey as an organization. So as you'd expect, like many organizations, we have been developing this over time, but we have made significant strides during the pandemic. Again, something we've heard from our members is that they've been able to address many of these challenges head on during the pandemic. So from a standing start, really over a couple of years ago, we're now active in a wide range of initiatives relating to sustainability, climate change, and the business transition to a net zero economy. So a few examples, I've got sort of 5 items that I was going to mention. So the first is that we have established a national sustainability task force of IOD members. Now this is chaired by an IOD member as well, Andrew Griffiths, and the role of the task force is to advise the IOD management team on how the IOD itself can become more sustainable and how IOD members can be supported in embedding best practices into their organizations. So the task force has also been supporting us in terms of helping members, and we have very recently launched our new Sustainable Business Hub, so please do check that out on the website. And we'll be updating sort of events and content there on a regular basis. The second item relates to our London Pall Mall carbon footprint, and indeed the carbon footprint across all of our premises around the UK. So we have been working with an organisation called Planet Mark. They have certified us for the second consecutive year in 2020. We were able to achieve a year-on-year decrease in emissions of about 40% from 2019 results, 22% per employee and 30% per member decrease. Now, indeed, many of the things that have happened over the past year have allowed us to have a huge impact, but we're now examining ways in which we can maintain that, and we'll be continuing our certification process into the future in future years. The third item relates to this is that the IOD has itself pledged to achieve a net zero target by 2050 or earlier via the SME Climate Hub portal, and we'll be working with members to explore ways in which we can support them in taking the pledge, but also achieving this goal at the earliest opportunity, which indeed is we would like it to be much earlier than 2050. So we're looking at that on an ongoing basis. And the fourth item is that we are looking at ways in which we can embed sustainability into our own professional development programs. So we have existing programs, certificates, chartered director qualifications, and so on. But we need to also look at how we can offer standalone programs to support directors with better deepening their understanding of these issues and moving towards decarbonisation within their own organisation. And the last item to mention is relates to the Better Business Act campaign. So we announced our public support for the Better Business Act campaign in April, and although this reform of Section 172 of the Companies Act would be a significant change in the focus of company law, it is aligned with developments in corporate governance, which we support, namely a growing emphasis on ESG factors in corporate decision-making and the importance of broader stakeholder orientation. So these are the actions that we're taking at this particular point in time, but really our mission is to support our members with sustainability in the boardroom. We believe that there's a huge hill to climb for SME directors in educating them in how they can move towards decarbonisation and a decarbonised economy. And so we'll be doing everything we can to lead by example for the benefit of our members, but also for the benefit of society as a whole. And for us, this is really just the beginning, and we look forward to continuing to play our part in this very important agenda. So thank you very much for inviting me along today.
Yes, no, thank you, Joe, and we'll obviously touch on some of those elements as we move on to the debate. And now we head on to Dan Smith, who's from Northern Gas and Power, who will give an outline of what their take on the decarbonisation for industry and commerce is. I'll just get the
Thanks. Sorry. Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I've got a couple of slides. Can you share them, Tim, please?
Yeah, okay, just doing that, yes. All right. Can you see them?
There we go. Yeah, do you want to just go to the next one?
There we go.
Thanks. Yeah, my name's Dan Smith. I've got about 30 years experience in energy and carbon management, chartered energy engineer. I kind of got into energy when it was more of a cost-saving exercise as opposed to a carbon reduction exercise, which is very much what it is now. Over those 30 years, I've worked with loads of different sectors and businesses, from heavy industries to commercial properties to you name it. We've just done some energy efficiency on crematoriums, for example, from China, Africa, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, pretty much everywhere. I've worked on both sides of the coin as an in-house energy manager for many different clients and also from a consultancy point of view. So over that time, I've designed and implemented many energy and carbon reduction strategies and energy management systems. So that's just a bit of a preamble to say I'm coming at this very much from the customer's point of view, real actionable things that customers can do right now to drive their carbon reduction strategy. Here at Northern Gas and Power, we have a team of energy managers who work with thousands of customers, reducing their energy, reducing their carbon, reducing their costs. They all come together, to be quite honest with you. It used to be a cost reduction exercise. Obviously, things like carbon, the net zero week that we're talking about now has driven carbon to the front of the agenda, and we all know why, and it's obviously incredibly important that we do. But carbon management, energy management, it all ties in very well together. So can you go to the next slide, please, Tim? I've tried to summarize on the next slide a very high level thing of what, when and how businesses, what they can do. So going into a business, and this works for any size business, big, small, you know, sole traders, multinationals, it doesn't really matter, to be honest with you. There's more work required on the bigger companies, but the principle is the same, whoever, wherever, whatever you are. Now, the banner at the bottom of that slide is an assumption, and it's a huge assumption. It says carbon reduction is supported at the highest level of that company, that business, that corporation. That's essential. It's a bold assumption to make. If carbon reduction, if energy management is not supported at the highest level, the company's going to struggle. It needs to be discussed at board level. If it is, obviously resources can be assigned, costs can be assigned, and then actions can happen. If it's not, if it's a bit of a tick box exercise, which unfortunately still happens now and again, the company is always going to struggle. It's going to work around the edge. It's not going to get to the crux of the matter. So number one, high level buy-in. The appetite has to be there for carbon reduction. I think it is now. Things like we're doing, the news every day. Hopefully, the appetite for carbon reduction is there. It has to be there. This is not an option anymore. It has to happen for businesses. The benefit is carbon reduction equals cost reduction as well. So hopefully that will help get buy-in at board level. But that really is essential. Going down the bullet points on the slide, if I'm going into a business, first point, they need to take ownership, be transparent, full disclosure, and benchmark where they're at right now. This can be, it's very easy to look at the emissions from your properties or your processes, but like Magnus was talking about earlier on, transport fleet, just as important. Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 emissions. Benchmark yourselves. Bigger businesses are falling into the SECR reporting now, which is streamlined energy and carbon reporting. And this is a yearly mandated thing that they have to do, and it's basically publishing their kilowatt hour, their energy use and their emissions over Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3. So big companies have now got this benchmark. Smaller companies should establish a starting point, find out where you're at now, what your carbon emissions are, If you're going to reduce them, you need to know where you're starting from. It's as simple as that. If you don't benchmark them, you're not going to know how well you're doing. You're not going to know what progress you're making. You're not going to be able to assign targets. If your target is net zero, fantastic, but you may not be able to get to net zero. So your target might be 40% reduction, 60% reduction, but against what? You've got to have a benchmark. To get that benchmark leads into the third bullet point. Be aware of your own skills and resource. Do you, as a company, know what you're doing in terms of carbon reduction? Have you got the skill in-house? Do you need to go external? Don't be scared to go to external consultants to help you, because, like I say, if you don't benchmark it properly, you're not going to get the right kind of solution going on. There is a lot of consultants out there. We do this for companies that will help you with this. Just know what you've got. It's not as easy as I'm going to buy green energy. That's really quite a common thing. It's okay, we've got a green contract now, so therefore we're carbon neutral, aren't we? It's really not that simple. So you need to know what you're going to do. You need to know the skills in-house, resource available as well. Once we've got a benchmark and we've set a target, we need to know how we're going to get there. So yeah, let's buy green energy, but we need to put a full strategy in place. From my experience, one of the best ways to do this is from an energy audit, a full energy audit. There's a British standard for audits. It's British Standard 16247, I think, off the top of my head. And this covers buildings, it covers processes, it covers transport fleets. It's a full British standard for energy auditing. Now, out of a good energy audit, you should get lots of actionable measures that can be taken. And I'm not just talking about high cost stuff. They should always be your no cost stuff, operational behavioral maintenance. Let's work your assets better. Let's optimize what you've already got. This is the operational kind of thing. Behavioral stuff, get your staff to help you. If you're a big business, you're using a lot of energy, your staff are going to be very, very aware of where energy is being used. So if you help the staff, if you train your staff up, they will be able to help you on your journey. There's no cost to doing this. We're not buying brand new boilers. We're not buying big high efficiency air compressors at this stage. What we are doing is, for example, fixing air leaks, reducing the set point on the air compressor. This is what we can do in-house. We're not buying a new compressor. We're fixing air leaks, reducing the set point. We're going to the air compressors. We're checking the filters on dirty. We're doing very simple operational and behavioral things like that. Let's not jump into putting solar panels on the roof. There's a lot we can do before we get there. And the great thing about this, if the company allows it, operational and behavioral savings, let's make those savings. Let's ring fence the savings that we've made. And if we can ring fence the very easily obtained savings, we can use those savings to then go and buy high efficiency kit, which is lower down the priority list because there's a longer payback. So from the audit, we're going to have we should have a summary. We should have a summary of energy efficiency measures. Let's prioritize them in terms of payback. Like I say, operational, behavioral, maintenance stuff at the top. Maintenance is things like ensuring you've got no vibration on your motors. You know, motors are a real big energy user in industry. And I go to a lot of places and there's old motors, there's motors that are being rewound, there's vibration on the motors, they've been painted about 100 times, so they're really hot and they can't dissipate the heat. Maintenance has got a lot to pay on this. There's a lot of marginal gains in this, you know, fixing compressed air leaks, removing the vibration of your motors. It might be 0.25% reduction here, it might be 0.5% here, 0.5% here, 0.5% here. But all of these marginal gains add up. So let's say we can get 10% savings through, you know, pretty much no cost. There's a bit of resource, a bit of time and a bit of effort, but we haven't spent any real capital expenditure yet. Moving on down the prioritized list, we're getting to medium cost, higher cost. This is new bits of kit. This is new air compressors. This is variable speed drives. This is perhaps a new control system for whatever it happens to be, your extracts. This is when we start to spend money, but we spend it on new pieces of high efficiency kit. Life cycle costs of kit, of high efficiency kit, is lower. Let's not just look at the initial capex cost. Let's look at the life cycle cost to justify these new pieces of kit we're going to go in. So from the audit, we've got a big list of energy saving opportunities. This is what the customer needs to do now. We can, on that list, we will also have carbon reduction on there. We'll have kilowatt hours reduction. We'll have pounds and pence saving. We'll have tons of carbon reduction as well. So you've got those three things on this prioritized action plan. Right now we're talking about net zero, so let's prioritize it. Let's look at the carbon reduction list. Let's work from that. We've now got short, medium, long-term plan. Renewable energy is great. Solar panels on the roof, wind turbines in the car park is great. It's on this list. It's perhaps, I don't know, between 5 and 10 years payback, but it's certainly on this list. It's not to be forgotten. Everything should be on this list. Even, huge companies on this list should include switching powering your monitors on your desk off at night, so there's no standby LEDs on. It's a tiny, tiny fraction of a percentage, but I think Magnus said earlier on, every little bit helps. Every little bit helps in every aspect of this. Just because you spend £3 million a year doesn't mean you should leave your printer on in your office at night. Marginal gains, everything adds up. So it should be a prioritized action plan. You need the staff to follow this up as well. Going back to my earlier point, have you got the skill in-house? Have you got an in-house energy manager? Not many people do right now. So hence, let's get some external help in. That might just be somebody who can come in 1 day a month, 2 days a month to help you. But those 1 day, 2 days a month will absolutely help focus your skills, your knowledge. We go into places and we facilitate energy forums for companies. So like I say, it's 1 day a month, 1 day a quarter, just to facilitate an energy forum. And that's where we're upskilling people on site. We might upskill area managers. We might upskill operations managers. So they're now aware of energy. They know what to do. So giving them the time, the resource that can help them do it, and get some expert advice just to keep them focused, keep them on the right line. Because operations managers, they've got things to do. They look after production lines. They're responsible for getting product out the door at the end of the day. They are not energy managers, so it's going to be their number 5 or number 6 role. But let's not allow them to forget to do it. Keep it at high level. Last bullet point on there, important. You need the systems in place to manage your carbon reduction. EMS, energy management system, an essential thing. There's a good old saying in energy, as it is in everything else, you can't manage what you can't measure. So managing energy, managing carbon, you need to measure it. You need some kind of energy management system, which is, we've developed one called Clearview. We've got that in lots of customers right now. You can identify energy use, carbon emissions, down to circuit level, down to breaker level, down to per minute detail. And once you can identify where and when energy is being used, you can identify waste energy. Once you identify waste energy, you can remove waste energy. You remove waste energy, you stop emitting the carbon. It's as simple as that. An energy management system allows you to do this. Energy is a plan, do, check, act kind of solution. It's a continuous improvement, much like a lot of other companies are already doing with operational and production stuff. Energy is no different. It needs to be policed. An energy management system, people can make some operational and behavioral changes. Let's say they're going to isolate the compressed air somewhere when they go for their lunch break. This is going to save you tiny percentages, but it's important. Best will in the world, people will do this when you tell them to do it, but 3 weeks down the line, they're going to go back to their own old ways of working. That's human nature. An energy management system for operational and behavioral things can police this behavior. It can make sure people keep doing best practice. They can keep making these changes and they don't fall back into their old ways. The 3 icons at the bottom of the screen, that's really a summary of energy and carbon management. This is getting back to the crux of it, what do businesses need to do, when and how. They can only do 3 things. You can only do 3 things with energy and hence with carbon. And those 3 things are the only things you can do. You can buy better. Now, buy better means you can buy green energy. You could get some kind of PPA agreement and buy renewables from the farmer who's got a turbine in his field. You might be next to a district network that you can tap into. So buy better, buy smarter, use less. Self-explanatory. Let's be energy efficient. Let's reduce what energy we use. We reduce energy, we reduce carbon. It's as simple as that. And use smarter is often forgotten. This is things like, if we want to reduce our carbon, we need to be really smart. We need to look at decarbonizing stuff. Stop burning stuff is a real easy statement to make, but let's get rid of burning stuff, gas, oil. Let's electrify everything, and as the grid decarbonizes, you will then hence decarbonize your site. Using smarter is about doing things like a pinch analysis in a process line where you might have heating and cooling everywhere for all types of processes. Do a pinch analysis, which is literally I can pinch a bit of heat from that process and put it into this process. I can pinch a bit of cooling from one place and put it somewhere else, and this avoids you having to generate heat, having to burn gas, having to cause emissions. If you can pinch cooling, you're avoiding having to run chillers, hence avoiding having to use electricity, hence reducing carbon. So that's a high-level summary of what businesses should do. When they should do it now. That's dead simple. The when bit of it is do it 20 years ago. That's really not a question at all. How? There's a very high-level summary of how we start to move forward with energy management, carbon management, energy reduction, energy efficiency, carbon management. It's in the same basket. You do one, you do the other. So, yeah, thanks for listening. Happy to be a part of this Net Zero Week. It's obviously incredibly important to everybody. So we're looking to help as many of our customers as we can. We're pushing all of this information out to all of our customers and helping all of them do their part for carbon reduction.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks. Yes. So from all these presentations, it seems that one of the major themes is that this time, sort of as Matthew, I suppose, put it more succinctly, this time it's being taken seriously. Actually, maybe to Matthew first, but how likely is it that politicians could give up on net zero, like you gave examples of them having done so in the past, where, I don't know, in the face of a public backlash against certain measures, like maybe, the ban on cars would be an obvious one where people, tied to their car and have an emotional attachment to it and so on.
Yeah, I think I should just say, actually, as luck would have it, there's some work going on at the the block of flats I live in, so if you hear any banging in the background, it's probably not putting in solar panels down. I don't think they're doing that, but something else. So apologies for any background noise. I think that there is a risk, although I do think, as I was sort of saying at the start, this time does feel different, and I think the momentum is there. I think that the tough time politically will probably be a few years hence, the sort of late 2020s, when the agenda has to move from the rhetoric and the sort of big ticket items, which most people would be fairly positive about, I think, sort of more offshore wind or whatever it would be, down to more sort of regional, local focus, where already there was something yesterday, I think, where the mayors were talking about they need more powers to influence local heating decisions, planning decisions, to sort of push their communities towards net zero. So I think when some of the debates become less sort of high level, we've got a 10-point plan for the country, as Boris would say, down to decisions being made by my local authority, my metro mayor, whatever. That I think becomes more challenges, and I think some of the stuff, particularly around domestic heating, gas boilers, is going to be difficult because you're talking about people's homes. Already there's some debate starting about who pays for all this stuff. So I think in a few years' time, probably late 2020s, the sort of political going will get tougher. We saw was it Switzerland a couple of weeks ago, they had a referendum on, I forget the details, but some new sort of climate-related policies that the referendum rejected. So I think there will be some pushback at various times on various measures, but I do think this time the fact that the momentum seems to be there, the fact that the financial community, I think, is now very much switched on to this agenda in a way it just wasn't sort of 10, 20 years ago. So, I have a lot of conversations with, investment fund managers in property, for example, who are saying they're thinking very carefully about trying to make sure they don't in their property portfolios have buildings which are energy efficient, are going to be hard to retrofit and will become stranded assets in 10, 20 years time. All the sort of financial disclosure stuff, carbon risk disclosure stuff that's going on in sort of investment markets. I think that alone will sort of drive a lot of the sort of business investment thinking. So I think there will be some sort of choppy times ahead, but overall I think this agenda is now set and is not going away.
Joe, would you echo that, the Institute of Directors?
Sorry, off mute? Absolutely.
Yeah, or backtracking rather.
The other element that I would really emphasise there, I'd echo everything that Matthew said, but also from a individual business leader perspective, I don't think there'd be a tolerance for any backtracking at this point. I think there's definitely a recognition of the importance of this agenda, and many have already begun investing quite heavily and making adaptations, and I don't see that reversing. But I think really what business leaders need is that sort of longer term commitment. It's not just these kind of immediate big ticket items and sort of.
People you're talking to, are they sort of chatting with you on sustainability issues about having a plan in place from now till 2050, proper long term on how I get zero carbon rather than just what we're going to do in the next 5 to 10 years?
It is, absolutely, and one of the things that we've seen a lot of success with is where organizations have gone external for support. So, ourselves at the ID, we've worked with Planet Mark, which have done a fantastic job of helping us benchmark where we are, and helping us move in the right direction. And there are countless organizations that can support our members with this kind of work. And so we're trying to facilitate and encourage as much of that connectivity as we can just now. But there is that sort of longer term view. It's not just what can we do at the minute to kind of move slightly in that direction. It's what can we do to get there in a sustainable way.
And on the practical level, are you seeing people with those coming to you with actual wanting to get to net zero 2050 plan type of thing, rather than just can you save me a bit of energy like it may have been in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. People do genuinely, what the appetite is there. People do genuinely want to get there. And once we do some investigation work, regardless of incentives and things like that, there's a business case to do it. Save energy, save carbon, save money. There's a standalone business case to do this as well. So incentives are great, but we can do this without too many incentives. It's still there. It's still the business case. And that the bit of saving energy now up to the 2050 net zero doesn't really matter. It's a short, medium, long-term plan. It all feeds into one. Start saving energy now and you're well on the route to hitting your net zero at whatever is the appropriate length of time from now.
Magnus, are you thinking that most of your customers, are they actually requesting your product through net zero, through part of a net zero plan and a broader environmental push? Or is it just something that they just ad hoc think, we can save a bit on our fuel here?
It was never to save money on their fuel that they transition. And I think, interestingly, our customers are wedded with the idea of reducing carbon in their operations. And one of the very easy targets for them is to look at their fossil diesel requirement, whether that's on or off road. So, or it's very easy, in theory, emotionally very difficult, because obviously diesel has been sold for the last 100 years to them in a particular way. So they have a mentality around buying that commodity, that energy piece, which actually doesn't really fit into current conversations. So there is a shift from procurement of energy now to corporate responsibility teams, environmental managers.
and that would be the biggest driver of your customers, is that you're simply they're on this sort of path to decarbonisation, and therefore they stumble across, you know, a drop in fuel that will help them achieve that.
Well, they're acutely aware of the targets that they need businesses to hit in order to meet government targets and their own industry standards. They've been given all of the solutions and all the future-proof solutions with electric vehicles and electric plant and hydrogen-powered vehicles and stuff like that. But actually what they've realised is that the risk and the capital requirements to make those transitions aren't probably the right decisions for their business today. The right decision today is to actually make a difference, but actually buy themselves some time while their current assets still have, you know, usable life within them. And what we're seeing, you know, and principally the difference that we've seen in the last 2 years is immeasurable. It's no longer when shall we start doing this. It's we need to start now. How are we going to make that happen across our business?
And so would you have a view that the sort of change is different this time and probably irreversible?
Absolutely, and people with the help of people like Dan and EIC have absolutely started to really investigate what matters within their business on this journey. Interestingly, you know, a very well-known and loved baker in the UK that we've been supplying for 3 years hit the 30 million mile mark on sustainable renewable fuel last month. Initially, that was because they wanted to reduce carbon. Lastly, what they've done is they've realised actually that it gives them significant advantage over their competition because they're able to have low carbon slices of bread, i.e. a lower embodied carbon in their product that is on the shelf of the supermarket, which means they're helping the supermarkets hit their targets. So what we're seeing is people realise that there's an interconnection between their activities and their burn of fuel to their customers, and there's a value to their customers in transitioning now to a low carbon solutions. But that's only just started to appear in the marketplace. And I think it is spurred by the fact that people are looking at carbon price in the market. Suddenly,
a very brief questions actually just come in, Magnus, regarding it. It says, what is the cost of biofuel versus diesel per litre? Just on the cost comparison.
That's a great question, one of those which I can't give you an absolute answer for, so I'll give you as a percentage. So you're looking at around about an 8 to 15% premium on regular diesel sold in volume. And the reason I can't say it's X pence per litre is because obviously there's logistics involved in delivering the litre of fuel. So quantity and location make a significant difference to that differential. I think worth noting in this forum, though, is that obviously the red juicy subsidy disappears on the 1st of April 2022, and I think that will be significant to help people who had previously had subsidised rates of fuel to actually make a transition to a low carbon fuel, because the differential is less on a road fuel than it is on a subsidised duty fuel.
Dan, it's something Magnus was just saying there about the interconnectivity of, you know, you realise that you reducing your emissions might help the supermarket save theirs, sort of thing. I noticed you mentioned scope 1, 2 and 3. I mean, do you get the feeling that a lot of people understand these terms and are focusing on all particularly scope 3 being more difficult?
Yeah, not a lot of people understand them yet, I don't think, but the knowledge is becoming better, much better. Even going back to, there was legislation, ESOS, which a lot of big companies had to do, where audits were done on not just premises and processes, but transport fleets as well, and that was a scope 3, and it as well as the fuel that's going into the trucks, it looks at things like route planning and how hard the drivers are accelerating, how hard the drivers are braking, how economical they're driving, in other words. So the fuel plays a part of it, and also the behavior of the drivers as well. And also looking at business miles done in private vehicles, that's scope 3, whereas business miles done in company-owned fleet is scope 1. So there's a lot of differences here, but people are now becoming more aware of it. I do see an awful lot of incorrect carbon emissions reports from companies because BEIS change the emissions factors once a year, and sometimes people don't catch up with them. And I have the worst case, I've seen somebody using 5-year-old figures, and what can I say? You get a lot of wrong ones. The awareness is increasing in terms of carbon footprints. Yeah, I know a lot of our customers, food manufacturers in the supermarkets, for example, when they're tendering to supply supermarkets with goods, they need to put a carbon footprint along with that tender. It's not just 20 pence per unit. It's 20 pence per unit, and however many kilos of CO2 is emitted during the production processes. So the carbon, I keep saying energy management because that's my background, carbon management, it's the same thing, and the energy management systems that allow you to track exactly how much carbon emissions, how much energy is used for your products, it's really important, and it needs to be quick, it needs to be easy. We're in the realms of big data now, so we don't want people with spreadsheets and taking notes of meters and things like that. It needs to be quick, it needs to be easy, it needs to be accessible at 2 clicks of your mouse maximum to get all of these things front and center of people's knowledge.
I've got a question here that anyone feel free to jump in, but maybe Matthew might like to try first. But it says, are there any avoidance mechanisms in place for companies? We've used the EU ETS credits, for example, so lip service to the cause by transferring the responsibility.
Yeah, I think, I suppose this sort of links to offsetting and so forth, doesn't it? So yeah, there are, it's quite common for companies who are, setting themselves a net zero target, say, well, we can't eliminate all our emissions by 2030 or the date they have in mind, either because it's electricity coming through the grid, which is not decarbonised, or as I suppose sort of Magnus's point, perhaps they have asset plant that they just feel it's not economic to replace that sort of much earlier than they plan to. And so what you often will see is, or people may be part of a trading scheme, as you say. I think the difficulty with this is, I think it's absolutely right that in this sort of transition phase over the next 10, 15 years in particular, that people will need to make use of these sort of mechanisms to get themselves on the journey. I think the difficulty at the moment is there's a lot of different stuff out there, so there's a lot of different carbon offsetting schemes. I'm not an expert in carbon offsetting, but I know people who are tell me some are much more rigorous than others. The price differs. Some people will go for the cheapest without worrying too much about the quality of it. So I think the advice I would say is that it should be a last resort. A strong message I think from all of us is there's always no regret stuff that you can do, which might be individually small bits but does add up. So don't just think, well, we'll just buy a load of offsets and therefore we're doing our bit. Think hard about the steps I was talking about earlier, the things Dan has said. Where are the emissions coming from? What's driving your customers? What can you do easily? What can you plan to do later on? But then, yeah, if you want to do the last bit, if it's the last bit you can't do other ways, by using things like offsets, I think that is legitimate at the moment. It may not be in 20 years' time, it is now. But do get some proper advice, I think, to make sure that the offsetting emissions trading you're doing is rigorous and is something that is going to be credible if it's looked at by your investors in due course, by regulators or by your customers.
I've got one here actually. It's back to asking a question for Magnus. Is if the premium on green diesel is 8 to 15%, what is the average saving realised against ROI?
Phenomenally good question. Obviously, there's a number of parameters within the question that would need to be defined to give you that ROI number. I would actually suggest that really that when you look at the ROI, if you just did an analysis of multiple different business opportunities, you could at least flat. Come out of all of the equations, you're probably flat with diesel price when you take into account, cost of saving, operational efficiencies that you gain, and overall impact to the business. So, for instance, take a dust cart, an electric version of dust cart available, absolutely phenomenal product. Dust carts tend to be in service for 15 years plus. Therefore, there's a lot of embedded plant out there already, and it will take you 7 to 10 years to get an electric dust cart to be flat with just using diesel currently. Obviously, you can achieve all of the same impact of that today with green. So, I suppose a waffly way to say, I think when you start looking at the overall operational cost, the way in which it's procured rather than a pence per litre and a floating pricing structure mechanism which is affected by a lot of external forces, i.e. foreign exchange, oil stability, regional stability, and that, what you find is that over the long term, I think it's very easy to see that most of our customers see a very small marginal increment over, say, a 2-year period to the diesel price. Then when you factor in the efficiencies that you get, the serviceability efficiencies, and you see it. So your return on investment, that's kind of a difficult one to answer unless you have a very specific detail.
Got another question here. Is how does ESOS and ISO 50001 fit in with the ESG landscape, so the environmental social governance landscape? I'm not sure who would like to attempt that one. But how does ESOS and 50,000?
If I could just jump in there, ESOS and 50,001 are great. 50,001 is a good energy management standard. ESOS has, or did when it was first done in 2015, brought energy front and center. Anything that will bring energy efficiency, energy management front and center has got to be a good thing. It's as simple as that. The problem with ESOS initially was companies were required to do audits and identify energy saving opportunities. They were not obligated to do anything to do any of these energy saving opportunities. So more often than not, there was a lovely report stuck in the filing cabinet and never actioned anymore. But now people are going back to their old ESOS reports and going, hang on, we've had something in the past that mentioned energy saving and carbon saving. So they're often going back to look at their ESOS reports. If you've got 50,001, you're deemed to comply with ESOS anyway because you've already got the processes in place. So sorry, I didn't hear the end part of your question, Tim, but in terms of ESOS 50,001.
With the broader ESG landscape. So the environmental social governance, I assume also just with the general net zero, where's this fit in the jigsaw?
Yeah, they've got to help. They're there. If people are now going, blimey, net zero, I need to do something about it. You might have an ESOS report in the filing cabinet or in your folder somewhere. Go back, pull it out. Yeah, it's
just to add to that, Tim, if I may, I think Dan's right in that ESOS at the time was a bit of a missed opportunity because it was a European scheme, wasn't it, Dan, as I remember, and people were required to do the audits, but then weren't required to do anything about them. And I know in the Netherlands, when they implemented the same sort of EU scheme, they actually added a sort of rider to it that I forget the detail, but it was something like if your audit showed that there was some things you could do which had a payback of less than 3 years or 4 years, you were required to show you had actually followed that up. And at the time, EIC was pushing the government to do something similar, but the government didn't go that path.
You'd be fined or something if you didn't do them in the Netherlands.
It was something like that. Yeah, there was certainly a sort of a stronger push to say, look, you've done the effort to do the audits. It's shown you some things you can do that will save you money. And I said it was reasonable. It wasn't like if there's a 10-year payback, you got to do it, because obviously other businesses that wouldn't be realistic. So at the time we were sort of pushing the government to follow suit, but they chose not to. But I think Dan makes a good point. There will be a lot of dusty ethos reports lying around, and it's a resource of people who are perhaps now coming back to the issue again.
I think also.
Okay, carry on.
Sorry. Tim, just to add to that, I think finally we are seeing some quite interesting schemes put in place to help the measurement of people's transition. So and those will filter in, I think, over the next couple of years. So I mentioned the ZEMO scheme, which is the Renewable Fuel Assurance Scheme, which was led by the Department for Transport. But there are other schemes like that which are helping the end user get simple, transparent data around their energy savings. So I think the upscaling of those tools for SMEs and large businesses will be a significant contributor to better reporting in the long run and action being taken.
Joe, what's your thoughts on the fact that there are so many schemes? We just talked about ESOS and 50,001, and you mentioned obviously, and they're all individually on their own very good, like the Better Business Act and so on. Is it just a bit mind-boggling? Do you find people come to you and say, well, which one to join, what's what, how's it all fit together, like that question was roughly about?
Absolutely, yeah, it's interesting. One of the other briefs I lead on is our skills agenda at the IOD, and there's increasingly sort of similarities amongst the two, is that there's really a very complex landscape for business leaders to navigate, and when you do know where to start, you're sort of okay. But for many of our smaller, it's really for SMEs, where they don't have that in-house resource, being able to navigate exactly where to start or exactly what to prioritize. That's the real challenge. And the reason I compare it to the skills agenda is there's just so many new initiatives during a period where organizations have really been in survival mode more than anything over the past year. So it does pose a real challenge. What we try to do is distill as much of the information as we can and present it to members. But often it is that sort of external support that can really, really help. One thing we've seen a lot of success with is knowledge transfer partnerships, where our SMEs work with local universities or colleges to tap into the expertise there to be able to apply that within their own organisation. We'd be keen to see that type of activity when it comes to decarbonisation and navigating some of these items within members' organisations.
Maybe after the event, all of you can help me on this question. It says, it'd be great to see a list published in the Energist of all the schemes that encourage participation. Yeah, I think it would be useful, but it's also a massive job. There's just so many now. This takes us basically to the end near enough. Unless there's any final points that any of you would wish to end on. No, well, thank you so much for your time today, and thanks everyone for listening. And don't forget, we have more keynote sessions later today, covering the electrification of the UK and how that's going to be achieved. And also next week, the actual week itself, Net Zero Week, which is Saturday to Friday, we have over 35 free to attend live events, all exclusively created for Net Zero Week to help you on your net zero journey. And lastly, big thank you to all our partners and sponsors. There's the 4 here, but also there's been over 50 collaborators actually to make Net Zero Week Awareness Week possible. And in particular, thank Northern Gas and Power, our principal sponsor, and Hitachi ABB, our co-sponsor. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for listening, and I hope to see you in the next webinar in a half an hour.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Yes, bye-bye.